Ironically, the most powerful man in the room was about to be stopped by the one person everyone believed had no power at all. The grand ballroom shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers, their light dancing across polished marble floors as collectors, philanthropists, celebrities, and business leaders gathered for the most prestigious charity auction in New York City. Every table displayed rare artwork, priceless jewelry, and historic memorabilia waiting for generous bids that would fund children's hospitals across the country. Every guest understood the evening followed a carefully planned schedule because every minute had been rehearsed for months. Near the stage stood Jasmine Reed, a curvy black auction assistant whose tailored black suit blended into the elegance surrounding her. She had spent the entire afternoon checking seating charts, verifying auction numbers, reviewing security procedures, and making certain every presenter appeared exactly when scheduled. Most guests never noticed assistants like Jasmine. They noticed the spotlight, not the people protecting it. Yet Jasmine believed the success of an event depended on those willing to respect details no one else appreciated. Her late father had repeated one lesson throughout her childhood. Rules only matter when they apply to everyone. Those words had become part of her character long before she entered the world of luxury events. At precisely 7:28 in the evening, the ballroom doors quietly opened again. Conversations softened almost instantly as Damian Brooks entered surrounded by several members of his executive team. Even among New York's wealthiest guests, his presence changed the atmosphere. He was a respected businessman whose influence reached far beyond finance. People admired his confidence, his discipline, and the calm authority he carried without raising his voice. Many whispered that no one ever questioned Damian Brooks. Others simply stepped aside as he walked toward the front of the ballroom. The master of ceremonies was still backstage preparing to begin the opening remarks. The stage lights had not yet reached full brightness. The live broadcast countdown still showed 2 minutes remaining. Damian glanced toward the stage, believing the organizers were ready for him earlier than expected. Without hesitation, he stepped onto the platform. A ripple of nervous whispers spread across the audience. Several organizers exchanged anxious looks, but no one moved. No one wanted to interrupt the most influential guest attending the evening. One coordinator quietly suggested waiting until the broadcast began. Another looked toward security before immediately shaking his head. No one wanted the responsibility of telling Damian Brooks to step down. Jasmine watched the countdown clock above the production booth. 1 minute and 43 seconds remained. She looked at the printed schedule in her hands, took a slow breath, and walked toward the stage. Her heartbeat quickened, but her expression never changed. She climbed the short staircase, approached Damian with quiet professionalism, and spoke clearly enough for him to hear without embarrassing him. "Sir, I need to ask you to step off the stage until the program officially begins." Damian turned toward her, surprised that anyone had interrupted him. Around the ballroom, conversations stopped completely. Hundreds of eyes shifted from the famous Mafia Boss to the auction assistant standing calmly beside him. Jasmine did not raise her voice. She did not apologize for enforcing the schedule. She simply held the event program in both hands and met his eyes with respectful confidence. "The presenters are scheduled to enter together when the countdown reaches 0, she continued. "The same procedure applies to every guest this evening." The silence that followed felt heavier than the applause everyone had expected only moments before. No one could predict what Damian Brooks would do next. For a moment, the entire ballroom waited for the reaction that everyone expected. They expected anger. They expected a powerful man to remind everyone who he was. They expected Jasmine Reed to realize she had made a mistake by speaking to someone like Damian Brooks. But instead, the room remained completely silent as Damian looked at the auction assistant standing in front of him. Jasmine held the event schedule calmly in her hands. She was not trying to embarrass him. She was not trying to prove she had authority over him. She was simply protecting the order of an event that depended on every person following the same standard. Damian studied her expression carefully. He had spent years surrounded by people who changed their behavior the moment they learned his identity. Some became nervous. Some became overly agreeable. Some avoided difficult conversations because they believed honesty could create problems. But Jasmine was different. She looked at him the same way she would look at anyone else who had stepped onto the stage before the scheduled time. That detail caught his attention. Around them, the organizers watched anxiously. The event director, a man named Charles Mitchell, approached slowly, prepared to apologize on Jasmine's behalf. He assumed the situation needed to be corrected immediately. "Mr. Brooks, we can make an adjustment if you would prefer," Charles said carefully. Before Jasmine could respond, Damien raised one hand slightly, stopping the conversation. He looked back at the countdown clock. 1 minute remained. Then he looked at Jasmine. "You are saying the schedule applies to everyone?" he asked. Jasmine nodded. "Yes, sir. The guests, the presenters, and the hosts. Everyone follows the same timeline." Her answer was simple. There was no attitude behind it. No hidden challenge. Only professionalism. Damien glanced around the ballroom. He noticed something he had never paid attention to before. Every person there was waiting to see whether his position would change the rules. They were not watching Jasmine anymore. They were watching him. For years, Damien had built his reputation on discipline. He expected others to respect agreements, deadlines, and commitments. Yet standing on that stage, he realized there was a difference between expecting respect and earning it. Slowly, Damien stepped down from the platform. The room reacted with a wave of surprise. Several guests exchanged confused looks. They had prepared themselves for a completely different outcome. Jasmine quietly returned to her position beside the stage, believing the moment had passed. She did not celebrate. She did not look for approval. She simply checked the schedule again and prepared for the next announcement. But Damien continued watching her. He noticed how she treated every person around her with the same level of attention. She guided volunteers, answered questions, and helped the presenters without seeking recognition. To most people, she was simply an auction assistant. To Damien, she had become something much more interesting. She was someone who valued responsibility over popularity. After the opening ceremony began, Damien remained in the audience instead of taking the spotlight. For the first time in a long while, he was not the center of attention. And strangely, he did not mind. As the auction continued, he found himself thinking about the woman who had politely asked him to step away. He had met countless people who wanted something from him. Influence, opportunities, approval. But Jasmine wanted only one thing. She wanted the rules to mean something. And that made Damien wonder what kind of person could stand in front of power itself and choose principle instead. The next morning, the story of what happened at the charity auction had already spread throughout the city. People who attended the event shared the same surprising detail. The most influential man in the room had been asked to step away from the stage, and instead of reacting with anger, he had quietly followed the rules. For many people, that moment became a mystery. They wondered why Damien Brooks had accepted a decision that almost everyone expected him to challenge. But the answer was not found in power. It was found in the character of the person who delivered the message. Jasmine Reed arrived at the event center early, just as she did every morning before a major auction. She checked the equipment, reviewed the guest list, and confirmed the final schedule with the production team. The attention she received the night before had not changed her routine. She was not interested in becoming famous for a single moment. She believed professionalism was built through consistency, not attention. While others discussed what happened on the stage, Jasmine focused on the next responsibility in front of her. That quality was exactly what made Damien curious. Later that afternoon, Damien asked one of his assistants to learn more about the auction staff member who had spoken to him. He expected to discover someone ambitious, someone hoping to gain recognition from the situation. Instead, he learned a very different story. Jasmine had spent years working behind the scenes at major events across the country. She had built her reputation by being dependable, organized, and honest. She was often the person people called when an important event needed someone who would notice details others missed. Yet despite her experience, she was rarely the person standing in the spotlight. Damien found that interesting because he understood the difference between visibility and value. Many people wanted to be seen as important. Jasmine seemed more focused on being useful. As he reviewed the information about her background, Damien discovered something else. Jasmine had faced moments throughout her career when people underestimated her before understanding her abilities. Some saw her position as simply supporting others. They did not see the knowledge, preparation, and responsibility required to keep a major event running smoothly. But Jasmine never allowed those assumptions to define her. She continued improving her skills and proving her value through her actions. That evening, Damien returned to the same ballroom where the auction had taken place. The room was empty now. The bright lights had been turned off, and the stage that once held hundreds of guests stood quietly. He remembered Jasmine standing there, holding the schedule in her hands, asking him to follow the same rules as everyone else. He realized something unexpected. She had not challenged his importance. She had respected the event enough to protect it. There was a difference. Many people around Damien believed respect meant avoiding disagreement. Jasmine showed him that true respect could also mean honesty. For the first time in years, Damien found himself thinking about a question he had rarely considered. How many people around him had stayed silent simply because they were afraid to tell him the truth? The answer unsettled him, not because Jasmine had embarrassed him, but because she had revealed something important. Sometimes the person with the least power in the room could be the one who protected everyone else. And Damien Brooks was beginning to understand that the woman he almost overlooked had shown him a lesson no amount of influence could buy. The questions Damien Brooks carried home after the auction refused to leave his mind. He had attended countless charity galas, investment summits, and exclusive events where people treated his arrival as the highlight of the evening. Yet one quiet auction assistant had accomplished something no board member, executive, or advisor had done in years. She had reminded him that authority did not place anyone above responsibility. The realization stayed with him long after the applause faded. 2 days later, Damien contacted the chairman of the charity foundation and requested a private meeting. The chairman assumed Damien wanted to discuss future donations or exclusive sponsorship opportunities. Instead, Damien asked for something unexpected. "Tell me everything that happened before I arrived," he said. The chairman looked surprised, but began describing the preparation for the auction. As the conversation continued, another detail emerged. Earlier that afternoon, one of the event sponsors had insisted on changing the order of the presentations to receive more publicity. Jasmine Reed had refused the request because altering the schedule would have disrupted the broadcast timing and created confusion for both guests and viewers. The sponsor complained to senior organizers, but Jasmine calmly explained the consequences and stood by the approved plan. Eventually, the organizers agreed with her decision. Damien listened without interrupting. The chairman leaned back in his chair and smiled. "She probably saved us from a very embarrassing evening," he admitted. "Most people never realized how close we came to creating chaos." Damien nodded slowly. The more he learned, the more he understood that Jasmine had never singled him out. She had protected the event from anyone whose influence threatened its integrity. Whether it was a wealthy sponsor or the most respected guest in the ballroom, her answer remained exactly the same. The rules existed to protect the event, not to limit individuals. That consistency impressed Damien far more than confidence ever could. Later that afternoon, Damien returned to the foundation offices under the quiet pretense of reviewing future charitable partnerships. From the hallway outside the operations room, he watched Jasmine working with the event staff. She moved from one conversation to another with calm efficiency, helping volunteers solve scheduling questions, reviewing inventory lists, and reassuring a nervous intern preparing for an upcoming fundraiser. She spoke with the same patience to every person regardless of position. No one received special treatment. No one was ignored. Damien noticed that people trusted her because she never allowed emotions or status to influence her judgment. While many leaders demanded respect through authority, Jasmine earned it through consistency. As he prepared to leave, Damien overheard 2 employees discussing the auction. One quietly asked why Jasmine had risked her job by stopping such an important guest. The other answered without hesitation, because if she had made one exception that night, she would have spent the rest of her career explaining why the rules mattered only sometimes. Damien stopped walking. Those words echoed everything he had been thinking since the auction. True principles were meaningful only when they remained unchanged under pressure. For years, he had measured strength by influence, reputation, and decisive action. Now he began measuring it differently. Real strength belonged to the person willing to protect fairness even when doing so carried personal risk. As Damien stepped outside into the cool evening air, he realized his next decision would not simply affect Jasmine Reed. It would reveal whether he truly believed the lesson she had quietly placed before him on that stage. 3 days after the auction, the Charity Foundation announced a private appreciation luncheon for the volunteers, coordinators, and staff who had made the event successful. It was not a glamorous occasion. There were no television cameras, no celebrity interviews, and no luxury displays. The gathering was meant to thank the people who usually worked behind the scenes while others accepted the applause. Jasmine Reed arrived wearing the same quiet professionalism that defined everything she did. She greeted volunteers, helped arrange the seating cards, and checked the timing for the short recognition ceremony before taking a place near the back of the room. She never expected to be noticed. Across the ballroom, whispers began spreading as Damian Brooks entered unexpectedly. Unlike the auction night, he arrived without an entourage or unnecessary attention. His appearance surprised nearly everyone because guests of his stature rarely attended staff appreciation events. Several organizers immediately hurried toward him, assuming he wanted a reserved seat near the front. Damian politely declined and asked only one question. "Has the ceremony started yet?" When they told him it would begin in a few minutes, he quietly waited near the entrance. Jasmine noticed him but returned her attention to the event schedule. She assumed he had come to support the foundation and thought nothing more about it. Moments later, the chairman welcomed everyone and thanked the staff for their dedication. As the ceremony neared its conclusion, Damian stood from his seat and calmly asked if he could say a few words. The room instantly became silent. Most people believed they knew what was about to happen. Some expected him to thank the donors. Others assumed he would speak about the success of the charity auction. Almost no one expected him to mention Jasmine Reed. Damian stepped onto the stage only after the chairman invited him forward. This time, he waited until the proper moment. Before speaking, he glanced toward Jasmine, who looked genuinely confused by the unexpected attention. "A few nights ago," Damian began, "many people watched an auction assistant ask me to step away from this stage." A quiet wave of nervous laughter moved through the audience before disappearing almost immediately. Damian continued with complete sincerity. "Some people believed she embarrassed me. They were mistaken. She protected the integrity of an event that deserved fairness more than it deserved my convenience." Every eye turned toward Jasmine. She remained seated, her expression calm but surprised. Damian continued speaking. "Leadership is not about expecting exceptions. Leadership is about respecting the same standards that everyone else is expected to follow." Jasmine Reed reminded me of that lesson, and I am grateful she had the courage to do it. The ballroom became completely still. Several organizers lowered their heads, remembering how they had privately worried Jasmine might lose future opportunities because of her decision. Instead, the most respected guest at the auction was publicly recognizing her professionalism. Damian then asked Jasmine to join him on the stage. She hesitated for a brief moment before walking forward with the same composed confidence she had shown from the beginning. When she reached the stage, Damian extended his hand with genuine respect. "Thank you," he said quietly enough that only those nearest could hear, "for treating me like every other guest." Jasmine smiled politely before answering. That was always the plan. The audience responded with warm applause, not because someone powerful had spoken, but because they had witnessed something far more meaningful. Respect had not been demanded that afternoon. It had been earned. The recognition ceremony ended, but the impact of that moment continued far beyond the walls of the charity foundation. For Jasmine Reed, life returned to its familiar rhythm. She arrived early, organized schedules, supported event teams, and continued doing the work that most people never noticed. The attention from the previous evening did not change her attitude. She did not walk differently because a powerful man had praised her. She did not expect special treatment because people finally understood her value. Jasmine believed respect was not something to collect after success. It was something to practice every day. Damian Brooks noticed that more than anything else. In the days following the ceremony, he found himself thinking about the difference between recognition and character. Many people became humble after receiving criticism because they wanted to repair their image. Jasmine had been humble before anyone knew her name. That was what made her different. She had no audience when she chose honesty. She had no guarantee that anyone would support her decision. She simply followed what she believed was right. Damian had spent years studying people. His position required him to understand motivation, confidence, and ambition. He knew how often people changed their behavior when they entered a room with influence. But Jasmine remained consistent in every situation. She treated everyone with the same patience, whether they were volunteers, guests, or executives. One afternoon, Damien visited the foundation office again. This time, his purpose was not business. He wanted to understand how the organization created such a strong team culture. During his conversation with the chairman, he asked about Jasmine's role. The answer surprised him. Jasmine had often been the person who solved problems before they became visible. She reviewed plans, noticed missing details, and helped younger employees develop confidence. Yet she rarely accepted praise because she believed teamwork mattered more than individual attention. Later that day, Damien found Jasmine reviewing documents for another upcoming event. He approached her and thanked her for the way she handled the auction night. Jasmine looked up with a small smile. "You already thanked me publicly," she said. Damien nodded. "I know, but I wanted to thank you privately too." Jasmine placed the papers down and listened. "That night, everyone expected me to be the person with the most authority," Damien said. "But you reminded me that authority means very little if it cannot respect the same standards it expects from others." Jasmine remained quiet for a moment. She understood that the conversation was not about the stage anymore. It was about a lesson Damien was still learning. "I did not do anything special," she replied. "I just did my job." Damien smiled slightly. That is exactly why it mattered. The simplicity of her answer stayed with him. Jasmine never saw herself as someone challenging a powerful person. She saw herself as someone protecting a responsibility. That difference changed everything. As weeks passed, Damien began making changes in his own organizations. He encouraged employees to share concerns earlier. He asked for different perspectives before making important decisions. He started recognizing people whose contributions were often invisible. Some executives noticed the change and wondered what had caused it. Damien never explained the full story. He simply said that a great leader should always be willing to hear the truth. Meanwhile, Jasmine continued moving forward without seeking attention. She had never wanted influence over others. She only wanted fairness to matter. But sometimes, the quietest actions create the strongest impact. And Damien Brooks was beginning to understand that the person who stood beneath the spotlight the least could sometimes reveal the most about what true leadership looked like. Several months passed, and the story of that charity auction slowly faded from public conversation, but its influence continued shaping the people who had witnessed it. Inside the offices of the foundation, new employees often heard experienced coordinators repeat one simple principle. Every person deserves the same respect, and every rule deserves the same commitment. They rarely mentioned where that lesson came from, yet everyone understood its meaning. Jasmine Reed continued leading event operations with the same quiet confidence that had always defined her work. She still arrived before sunrise whenever an important event was scheduled. She still walked every hallway, checked every seating chart, tested every microphone, and reviewed every emergency procedure before the first guest arrived. Nothing about her routine changed because recognition had never been her destination. Consistency remained her greatest strength. Damien Brooks noticed another change, one that could not be measured on financial reports or public announcements. People inside his own organizations had become noticeably more willing to speak honestly during meetings. Junior employees who once remained silent now shared thoughtful concerns. Senior executives no longer viewed difficult questions as personal criticism. They understood that honest disagreement often protected the company from costly mistakes. Damien encouraged those conversations because he remembered how one respectful voice had changed his own perspective. During a planning session for another major charity gala, Damien accepted an invitation to observe the preparation process before the event began. Instead of sitting with sponsors and board members, he spent nearly an hour watching the operations team coordinate dozens of moving parts. He saw Jasmine calmly solve scheduling conflicts, reassure anxious volunteers, and patiently explain procedures to new assistants who were still learning the demands of large public events. She never raised her voice. She never rushed people unnecessarily. Yet every task moved forward with remarkable efficiency because everyone trusted her judgment. After the meeting concluded, Damien asked Jasmine if they could walk through the empty ballroom together. The room looked ordinary without hundreds of guests filling the seats, but for both of them, it carried the memory of an evening neither would forget. As they reached the front of the stage, Damien paused before speaking. "May I ask you something I have wondered about since the auction?" Jasmine nodded. "Of course." Damien looked toward the stage where everything had begun. "Were you afraid when you asked me to step down?" Jasmine smiled thoughtfully before answering. I respected what could happen if I stayed silent more than I feared what might happen if I spoke. Damien considered her words carefully. Most people would have worried about losing their position. Jasmine looked across the empty rows of chairs before replying. A position can always be replaced. Integrity cannot. If I protect my job by ignoring the rules, eventually I lose both. The ballroom became quiet once again. Damien realized her answer reached far beyond one charity event. It described a way of living that refused to change according to circumstances. He understood why people trusted her. Her principles were not temporary decisions. They were permanent foundations. As they prepared to leave, Damien looked back at the stage one final time. Months earlier, he believed that platform represented authority and recognition. Now he saw something different. It represented responsibility. Anyone could stand beneath bright lights and accept applause. Far fewer people possessed the courage to protect fairness when no one promised they would be appreciated for doing so. And Damien Brooks knew that the greatest lesson he carried from that stage had never been about power. It had always been about character. As another year approached, the Charity Foundation announced its largest fundraising gala yet, an event expected to attract national attention and record-breaking donations. Sponsors, community leaders, collectors, and business executives prepared to attend, knowing the evening would be watched by audiences across the country. Months before the doors opened, planning had already begun, and one change immediately caught everyone's attention. Damien Brooks requested that every guest, regardless of influence, receive the exact same event guidelines before arriving. There would be no special entrances, no exceptions to the published schedule, and no changes based on status. Some advisors questioned whether such strict consistency was necessary for high-profile attendees. Damien answered with quiet certainty. If the rules only matter for some people, then they do not truly exist. Those words quickly spread throughout the planning committee. Jasmine read the updated event policies without any expectation that they had anything to do with her. She simply appreciated seeing procedures written with unusual clarity. As always, she focused on preparing the event rather than wondering who deserved credit for the improvements. During the weeks leading to the gala, she trained new auction assistants, teaching them the same principles that had guided her career. She reminded them that guests should always be treated with courtesy, but courtesy never required sacrificing fairness. She explained that professionalism was measured by consistency, especially during moments of pressure. The younger staff listened carefully because Jasmine never taught through speeches. She taught through daily example. Damien occasionally visited the preparation meetings, but he deliberately avoided placing himself at the center of attention. Instead, he watched how the operations team worked together. He noticed that people trusted one another more than before. Questions were welcomed instead of discouraged. Problems were discussed early instead of hidden until the last moment. The atmosphere felt different because employees believed their voices mattered. Damien recognized that this culture had not been created by authority alone. It had grown because one person had shown that integrity could remain steady even when facing influence. On the evening of the new gala, the ballroom once again filled with elegant guests beneath brilliant crystal chandeliers. Reporters waited outside while cameras prepared to broadcast the event. As the final countdown approached, Damien stood quietly near the entrance instead of walking toward the stage. Several guests noticed the decision and smiled, remembering what had happened the previous year. Jasmine stood beside the production coordinator reviewing the final timing. When the countdown reached 0, she gave a simple nod, signaling that the program could begin exactly as planned. Damien entered the stage only after receiving the scheduled invitation from the Master of Ceremonies. This time, the audience responded with warm applause that carried a different meaning. They were not applauding a powerful man simply because of his reputation. They were applauding someone who had chosen to honor the same standards expected of everyone else. As Damien looked across the ballroom, his eyes briefly met Jasmine's. Neither of them spoke. They did not need to. Both understood that the most meaningful victories rarely arrived through dramatic confrontations. They arrived through quiet decisions repeated consistently over time. In that silent exchange, Damien realized the greatest change had never been the policies, the procedures, or even the successful events that followed. The greatest change was that fairness had become stronger than influence. And because one auction assistant, refused to compromise her principles. An entire room had learned that respect grows strongest when no one stands above the rules. Years after the night that changed the way people viewed leadership inside the charity organization, the lesson behind that moment continued to influence everyone who had witnessed it. The story was never remembered because a powerful mafia boss once stepped onto a stage. It was remembered because he chose to step back when someone reminded him what fairness truly meant. Damian Brooks continued building his businesses and supporting charitable causes, but his approach to leadership remained permanently different. He no longer measured success only by results, profits, or public recognition. He began measuring success by the trust people placed in him and the honesty they felt safe enough to share. The change was visible in every organization connected to him. Employees who once believed important decisions were made behind closed doors were now invited into conversations. Team members who had valuable ideas no longer hesitated to speak. Damian understood that a leader surrounded only by agreement would eventually lose perspective. He wanted people around him who respected him enough to tell him the truth. Jasmine Reed continued working behind the scenes, exactly as she always had. She never viewed herself as someone who changed a powerful man. She believed she simply followed her responsibilities. That humility was what made her influence even stronger. People respected her because she never used recognition as a reason to look down on others. She treated every assistant, volunteer, and guest with the same patience and professionalism. Her greatest achievement was not being noticed by important people. It was reminding important people that every person deserved to be noticed. One evening, after another successful charity event, Damian and Jasmine stood together in the same ballroom where their unexpected journey had started. The lights were softer now. The tables had been cleared, and the room was peaceful after another evening of generosity and celebration. Damian looked across the empty stage and remembered the moment when Jasmine had approached him with a simple request. At that time, everyone believed the situation was about authority. Now he understood it had always been about character. "You know," Damian said, "most people would have found a reason to make an exception that night." Jasmine smiled. "Most people probably thought I was protecting a schedule." Damian looked at her with curiosity. "And what were you really protecting?" Jasmine paused before answering. "Trust. Once people stop believing the rules apply equally, they stop believing the system is fair." Damian remained quiet for a moment. Those words represented everything he had learned. Power could create attention. Wealth could create opportunities. Influence could open doors. But none of those things could replace integrity. The most respected people were not always the ones with the highest positions. They were the ones who remained honest when doing so was difficult. As the evening ended, Damian thanked Jasmine one final time, not as a powerful businessman speaking to an employee, but as one person acknowledging another person's strength. Their journey had started with a simple disagreement on a stage. It ended with a deeper understanding of respect, responsibility, and humility. The woman everyone underestimated had shown a room full of influential people that true confidence did not need to demand attention. The man everyone expected to enforce his power had shown that real strength came from listening. And from that day forward, everyone who knew the story remembered one simple truth. Dignity does not come from standing above others. It comes from having the courage to stand beside them.